Hello, I'm Jason Howland, and welcome to Speaking of Health, a place to help you learn how to live a longer and healthier life. Childhood bullying is a serious issue in our country, and with kids now communicating through social media and smartphones, cyberbullying and other forms of electronic harassment are becoming even more common. Here to tell us more about recognizing and dealing with bullying is Maureen Tanis. She is a clinical social worker from the Behavioral Health Department at Mayo Clinic Health System. Maureen, thanks for joining us today on Speaking of Health.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are talking today about childhood bullying. I guess the first question is, how common is it?
Unfortunately, it's very common. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry has recently reported that over half of children report being bullied at some point.
When we're talking about bullying, does that mean actual physical violence then?
It can, but not necessarily. It can really take a number of forms, and it's important to remember that bullying is an aggressive act, an intentional act that tends to be repeated or can be repeated, has the potential of being repetitive, that involves an imbalance of power, either real or perceived. And the bullying can be physical, typically what you're thinking of, perhaps, hitting, kicking, pushing, shoving, spitting, destroying property. But the majority of bullying, as much as 90%, is really verbal or social. And that's what you think of, the rumors, malicious gossip, intentional excluding of students, of friends, and of other peers. And then, as you mentioned, cyberbullying. In this day and age, unfortunately, has become another avenue where bullying can occur. And kind of what you'd think, Facebook, texting, email, you name it.
You know, a lot of times kids may be afraid or embarrassed to go to their parents if they're being bullied. So what are some common warning signs for parents that may indicate that maybe their child is being bullied?
You're right. Unfortunately, kids often can be afraid to tell their parents. It can be embarrassing to admit that they're being bullied. Sometimes they can be afraid that they're going to be excluded further. Maybe the few friends that they do have, they're afraid are going to be upset with them or retaliate against them, that kind of thing. So it is important for parents to be aware of some of the warning signs. Some of the more typical ones are a change in interest or in wanting to do something differently. Perhaps all of a sudden they don't want to ride the bus, or they don't even want to go to school, or they don't want to go to sports practice. Maybe they're complaining of stomach aches or headaches or sleep and appetite changes. Maybe you have the sense that something's wrong, but you're just not exactly sure.
Can there also be actual physical signs on your child?
Absolutely. There can be unexplained bruises, injuries.
You know, you talked about kids being embarrassed. I would assume that another topic that may come up is kids just don't want to be tattletales. They hear that term tattletale, and that's probably sometimes prevents them from telling their parents.
Yeah, and it's important to help kids understand that true tattling, is to intentionally get somebody in trouble. But in this kind of situation, we're talking about really asking for help because somebody is either being hurt or is at risk of being hurt.
So what's the best way as a parent to support your child if they're being bullied?
Well, I think the most important thing is to take your child seriously and, listen to your child. Ask your child about it. If you're suspecting that something's going on in the way of bullying, ask your child about it. Assure them that it's not their fault. Assure them that you'll work together to try and solve the problem. Find out more about it. Find out, who's doing the bullying, when and where. Has anybody else seen the bullying? That kind of thing.
So, Maureen, are there certain ways, the right ways to respond to bullying?
There are, and that's one of the things that we really try and help children understand who are experiencing bullying, and also help parents whose children are experiencing bullying. That one of the things that really gives fuel to the bully's fire is if a child really responds in an emotional way. Understandably, I mean, we certainly are understanding that emotional response, but that's exactly what the bully wants. So we want to help our child learn to maintain their composure. We want to help the child respond in neutral ways. A lot of times we'll tell a student, just ignore it. And that typically is not enough, especially like we said earlier, bullying tends to be repetitive. And so we need to give them a few more practical tools. So, using calm, neutral responses can be helpful. And that's things like saying whatever, or let me know when you get over it, or turning an insult into a compliment, just saying thanks and walking away. Encouraging your child to, really feel good about themselves. Help your child develop their self-esteem. What is your child interested in? What are they good at? Maybe it's sports, maybe it's music, theater, taekwondo, whatever it is. Tap into those strengths. That's a wonderful way for them to feel better about themselves, make good friends, because sometimes those friendship circles can be enlarged, and it really is a nice protective factor against bullying if they have some good friends and some things that they are doing that makes them feel good about themselves.
You talked about those neutral responses, and I think those are probably pretty important, because what the bully really is looking for is that response and that negative response, and seeing that it's making some effect on the child. And so the neutral response, that probably helps with that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when should your child, or when should the parent go to the school officials?
Typically the best people to go to are the classroom teacher, the school counselor, the principal. They can be very helpful in working through what's going on. Also continuing to support your child and helping them develop their self-esteem and feel confident, knowing that it's not their fault, that you're supporting them, encouraging them in those friendships that they can count on, those healthy friendships. And it's always important to keep in mind that that professional help might be needed, whether it's the school counselor or other mental health resources, if it just feels like more than parents and your family can handle on your own. And we do typically recommend that parents do not contact the bully's parents themselves.
Some parents might think, well, it's just a rite of passage. I was bullied in school, or I was the bully in school, and my kid's going to just have to deal with it. But that's not the case.
No, it really isn't. No child should have to experience this. And so letting your child know that you support them. One of the challenges of being a parent, I'm a mom myself, and is that we don't want to see our kids suffer, and we want to fix things. And sometimes we can't always fix things immediately. It takes time, but being present for your child, both emotionally and physically, and supporting them, listening to them, being ready to talk when they feel like talking can be huge.
And don't just leave your child to handle it alone.
Correct.
So as a parent, what are some of the dangers if you do just ignore the fact that your child's being bullied? What can happen?
Well, some of the more immediate and obvious consequences are that their academic performance can struggle. It can get to the point where kids are skipping school. Truancy certainly can be a factor. Injuries, physical injuries, obviously, can happen. And then we know some of the longer-term consequences are that kids can be at greater risk of depression, anxiety. We know that bullying can be a factor in suicides. If children have existing mental health conditions, those can be exacerbated or made worse by bullying.
We talked earlier about cyberbullying, and a lot of parents may not even be familiar with cyberbullying. It's only come around here recently with Facebook and social media and smartphones and all that. As a parent, how do you deal with cyberbullying?
That's a good question. One of the things we really like to encourage parents with is recognizing that it's okay to have access to your child's electronic media. It's okay to have an agreement that you are going to log on to their Facebook account, that you're going to know passwords. Most parents are paying for cell phone bills, so it's okay to have access to that cell phone. And so either you finding information that you are questioning, or your child coming to you and telling you that bullying is going on. Some of the most effective immediate responses are not to respond to the messages, and that's hard for kids, and as tempting as it can be, it isn't effective. And so ignoring those messages, not responding, blocking the person sends a real strong message. Printing out any kind of record so that you have that physical record or evidence of the cyberbullying can be effective and might be useful if a family has to interact with a cell phone provider or the like.
Maureen, should law enforcement also be involved? And I would assume with cyberbullying, you're looking at a lot of it as written proof of what's occurring too.
Yeah. It may be appropriate to involve law enforcement if there are sexually explicit messages or material, or photographs that were not intended to be shared, or any kind of threat. That's when law enforcement needs to get involved, absolutely.
I think it would be helpful to understand, what is the makeup of a bully?
Well, we know that there are a couple of different broad descriptions of people that might be at greater risk of bullying. One are those kids who are well connected socially, who have a lot of power. And so the bullying is, it kind of secures their place. And so, these are the kids that we talk about. There's nice popular kids, and then there's mean popular. And so these would be, those kind of mean popular kids that just want to really enhance their power. The other kind of child that might be at greater risk of bullying are the kids who are just more disconnected. They don't feel very good about themselves. They don't feel like they have a lot of support. The other sometimes factor that can come into play is if a child is isolated, more socially isolated, maybe not as empathetic to others. Those are other factors that can put a child at greater risk of being a bully.
So bullies don't always have to be the biggest kid in class then?
No, that's correct. Remember what we talked about before, that it's really about that imbalance of power. So it can be over popularity, how connected a child is, how well they do in school, how successful they are academically. It can have to do with the family's economic standing.
So I guess the million-dollar question is, how do we prevent bullying from happening in our communities and in our schools?
One thing that's really important is to help kids understand what bullying is. Make sure that they know what that is. Teaching respect, teaching tolerance is huge. Having conversations, like I mentioned earlier, being emotionally present and physically present to your children to really talk about this kind of stuff is huge. For parents to model being respectful, being tolerant of difference, of diversity. Parents really are the first teachers of children and continue to have a lot of influence as kids grow up. And, so how parents model dealing with frustration, dealing with people that they maybe don't particularly like or are difficult can be huge. And really helping your child find out who they are, developing their sense of self and their self-confidence.
Be a role model for your kids then.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are all out of time, but a great topic, and I'd like to thank our guest, Maureen Tanis, clinical social worker with Mayo Clinic Health System. Thank you.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
Have a great day, everyone, and be healthy.